I find almost everything that Mr. Trump says objectionable.
Yeah, it's strange. I was just talking to Donald Trump. I was doing a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago a couple of days ago, and I said, I think, we're like the cool kids now. I've never been at the cool kids table.
This is wild. Look, I'm going to pause on saying the cool kids.
No,
I
know.
will say this.
We've never been even near the cool kids. We're at we're in the hallway of the cool kids table. You know what I mean?
I consider him offensive and bigoted, but he has my full support to come to my country and be offensive and bigoted there.
Yeah, we're not just taking back the public square, we're going to take Parliament. We're going to take councils. We're going to take police forces. We're going to take school governor boards.
With the stroke of my pen on day one, we're going to stop the transgender lunacy.
Okay, Jake, I have to say something. And look, no one knows for sure. No one knows for sure because no one was in any of those rooms where Trump allegedly said very naughty things. But the generals hated Trump. They always hated Trump. Trump wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. They didn't want to pull out of Afghanistan. So all of the stories quoting, military generals who had meetings with Trump, closed door meetings, and Trump allegedly said all of these naughty things, I don't know what to believe because it's a he said, she said type situation.
If I'm going to lay my cards on the table, I would like to wake up tomorrow without any change to the presidency. And I know I'm not supposed to say that because that instantly makes me a white nationalist and a racist and a terrible person. But that's what I hope for. I think if it comes down to reproductive rights for women, or the right to say who we are and what we are, I think the latter is far more important.
What do Donald J. Trump and J.K. Rowling have in common, besides their unrestrained hatred for people they don't understand, or using a capital letter instead of a middle name? Well, a few years ago, you might have recognized they both had a Twitter addiction. For years, Rowling's snarkiest, substanceless responses to Donald Trump's tweets generated countless clicks for some of the laziest news articles this side of BuzzFeed. So how did they end up on the same side? Rowling was once a proud liberal.
Populism and nationalism currently sweeping many developed countries have been accompanied by demands that unwelcome and inconvenient voices be removed from public discourse. Mainstream media has become a term of abuse in some quarters. It seems that unless a commentator or a television channel or a newspaper reflects exactly the complainant's worldview, it must be guilty of bias or corruption. Intolerance of alternative viewpoints is spreading to places that make me, a moderate and a liberal, most uncomfortable.
She's a personal friend of former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and fame actor and overrated posh liberal Stephen Fry. But now Donald Trump's been elected for a second term, she's no longer posing as part of the resistance, whatever that means. Now, all the people who claim to be part of the resistance are demanding the Democrats fight Trump by getting more racist and throwing trans people to the wolves. Instead, she's actually celebrating, crowing that Trump's victory means that she was right, that all trans people are evil demons, while clarifying that she's not far right, actually, although usually if you have to clarify you're not far right, that ship might have already sailed. Actually, it left port years ago, when you were actively campaigning for trans exterminationist policies and snuggling up to people who admittedly want us all, unalived.
There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is true, if men really can become women, then it's true for everybody of all ages. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it, especially since that indulgence requires taking away the rights and customs of so many people. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
So, how did this happen? How did Rowling go from one of those people who makes it their business to be the sensible liberal in Trump's replies, who made us all cringe for 4 years,
Me, a moderate and a liberal,
to actively celebrating Trump's victory and declaring it a win not just for herself, but for all women? Today, I'm here to answer that question. We're going to go over her history with Trump, what she said in full regarding the recent elections, what changed, and whether she is right. Spoilers, she claims that the Labour Party in the UK is completely captured by trans ideology when they've banned puberty blockers, and have publicly said they're considering bathroom bans and amending the Equality Act to exclude us. So, in short, she lives in a parallel world where her depiction of goblins wasn't massively anti-Semitic, and everyone is super cool with the way she argued that slavery is good sometimes in her massively popular children's books.
I have a lot of respect for J.K. Rowling, both in terms of what she's done for children and literacy, but also the work that she's done campaigning for women, and in particular, violence against women and girls.
All that and more in this week's edition of the Daily Telegraph, the only newspaper besides the Daily Prophet whose print edition has moving pictures. Not because magic is real, but because we live in hell. And you can buy a little piece of hell for the small price of your immortal soul. Or £1.50, whichever one comes easiest to you. These boy wizards, they're everywhere now. They're everywhere. For the wizarding world, they're not sending their best folks. They're living under your stairs. They're running through walls. They have owls as pets. It's crazy. And you see what they're doing in Hogsmeade, folks? In Hogsmeade, they're eating the frogs, the chocolate frogs. They're alive, but they're made of chocolate. It's amazing. Hello there. I'm Bridget Empire, science and culture correspondent for this hell-touched rag of a paper we call the Daily Telegraph. And I'm here to talk about how people, and one person in particular, go from liberals to transphobes to open Trump supporters. And what better way to study this than a case study into the queen of the transphobes herself, and frequent star of this channel, Jungkook Rowling.
Me, a moderate and a liberal,
who, in reaction to Hitler-quoting, master-porting fascist president-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump,
He must be cognitively in trouble. No.
popped the cork off her champagne and took to X.com, the everything app, to write a diatribe that was shocking to liberals who have to see someone actively execute a trans person in public to deem them transphobic, but which anyone who's followed this woman's trajectory from children's author to cult leader will find entirely unsurprising. But just because it's not surprising doesn't mean we can't learn anything from it. So what exactly did Miss Robert Galbraith think about the triumph of fascism in America?
The police want to do it. The Border Patrol wants to do it. Border Patrol, they're incredible. They want to do it. They're not allowed to do it because the liberal left won't let them do it. The liberal left wants to destroy them, and they want to destroy our country.
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
Well, if you only paid attention to mainstream media and never gaze into the abyss that is Twitter, 1, I deeply envy you, and 2, you would have gotten the impression that Rowling is, rather than being deeply unhinged, that she was, well, hinged. Especially if you clocked out a few years ago, before the pandemic forced all boomers to sit on Facebook all day for a year and radicalized Yanan. J.K. Rowling, well, she had the same character arc as Yanan, but unlike Yanan, J.K. Rowling didn't give you the same kind of Lynx Africa every Christmas, so basically, she can fuck off. Where's my Lynx Africa, Joanne?
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
Take this write-up of a feud between Donald Trump and J.K. Rowling for the BBC, during what I can only assume was a slow news day in February 2017. Rowling's recent Twitter feed has been filled with her retweets criticising the president's recent travel ban. Some followers have taken umbrage with her stance, with several saying they have burned her books or plan to do so, and one suggesting she should just stay out of politics. But the novelist has proved a match for her critics, with her mocking responses. One Twitter user said they would now burn your books and movies too. Rowling hit back, external. Well, the fumes from the DVDs might be toxic, and I've still got your money, so by all means borrow my lighter. Another said she had just burned all their Harry Potter books after being a fan for 17 years. Rowling's riposte. Guess it's true what they say. You can lead a girl to books about the rise and fall of an autocrat, but you still can't make her think. Despite this being an article on a website paid for by the British licence fee payer about a Twitter beef, and therefore being a massive waste of everyone's time and money, Rowling in this post sounds relatively hinged. In fact, you might be wondering, what happened to this woman?
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
She sounds great. Well, she's not. She's still a vocal critic of Jeremy Corbyn for all the reasons a billionaire takes umbrage with a socialist, but as far as public figures go, that was par for the course. In fact, this article and this Twitter beef is from a whole year before the senior moment, as Rowling's PR team put it, that first tipped off the world to Rowling's burgeoning transphobia. So while Rowling was so libbed up in 2017 that she had to apologise for Trump for spreading false information about him ignoring a disabled boy, despite there being a million awful things that aren't false to accuse Adolf Orangeman of,
Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling has apologised to the family of a wheelchair-bound boy for tweets in which she accused US President Donald Trump of ignoring his proffered hand at a media event. Rowling branded Trump a monster of narcissism after footage of a July 24 news conference on healthcare appeared to show the president ignoring the 3-year-old's hand.
This is a sentiment being to online. If you're tweeting so much you stop verifying any claim that fits your worldview, it might be time to log off. This is foreshadowing for what later happens to her.
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
Anyway, 7 years later, she's writing praise of Trump and the things he's going to do in office. Her principles have gone from, well, existing to being, you're alright with me if you're pro-throwing trans people into a giant wood chipper. The Rowling who criticised Donald Trump's travel ban, resulting in the BBC article I just read from, would never be down with a man who's promising to carry out the biggest mass deportation in American history, and use a day of massive violence to crush the enemy from within. But people change. And if you're extremely online and falling into increasingly insular circles, people can change like that. It's an invasion. They don't like it when I use that word, but it's true, it's an invasion. They're flying over the border on broomsticks. They say they heard it work, but those brooms aren't used for cleaning, folks. They're casting spells on the hard-working Americans. Gangs like Dumbledore's army. They're burning down entire cities. They're casting Avada Kedavra and Expelliarmus snow. These people are dangerous. We're going to build a forbidden forest to take these out. In the magical world, there is no economic growth and very little economic inequality. The wizarding family we spent most time with, the Weasleys, a sort of down-at-heel nouveau pauvre aristocrats. Thank you, French. There is very little real injustice between wizards, and so the notion of inequality is introduced through exclusion on the basis of identity. It is the fact of elf identity or werewolf identity that is worth fighting for. Rowling basically builds a story around a conflict between two forms of identity politics. A bad side which cleaves to notions not so very different from Trumpian ideas of nationhood, and the other, a celebration of cosmopolitanism that makes its appeal to some of the world dispossessed at the expense of others. What is the ideology of J.K. Rowling? Is it liberalism?
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
Once upon a time, yeah. Harry Potter is a quintessentially liberal story where the great evil is a threat to a status quo that is deeply flawed. But at the end of the day, the status quo is restored, with none of its evils, be it slavery, discrimination of non-human species, any of the conditions that led to the rise of Voldemort, textually, confronted or changed. They are a necessary part of the world. That's just the way things are. Some people suffer, and it's sad, but we shouldn't do anything about it. This is a quintessentially centrist take. Whether Rowling intended it or not, that is the ideology of Harry Potter. Yes, the world sucks, but anyone who wants to do anything to stop it sucking is probably bad. But what is her ideology now? Is it MAGA? Is it fascism? Well, that depends on your definition of fascism.
He's Hitler. And then they say he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know.
Rowling has become a, to put it bluntly, one-issue voter. That issue being making all trans people disappear from the public view. Someone that supports that will receive her praise, no matter how much their ideology differs from the one she supposedly holds. From Christian fascist Matt Walsh to Donald J. Trump, Even the current Labour Party isn't transphobic enough for her, and most of Western Europe and America would consider them extremely anti-trans. Is this fascist? Well, it's certainly exterminationist. She's shown that any compromise beyond completely outlawing trans people as a phenomenon is not enough for her. And the only solution to that would be to forcibly detransition all of us, or something even more overtly violent. It certainly has elements of fascism. You could argue that the narrative she weaves around her bigotry is a rejection of modernism. It's certainly a fear of difference. She certainly is appealing to a frustrated middle class with this, given the main proponents of her ideology are columnists for major newspapers and pundits, and she is absolutely down with the obsession with a plot part of the definition of fascism, as outlined by Umberto Eco. I mean, she thinks all trans people are men secretly tricking the world into treating them as a persecuted minority so they can gain access to women's spaces and erase womanhood as a concept. That's bananas, and it's quite fashy.
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
You can add Newspeak to that list as well, the way that people in Rowling's Corner use TRA or TIMs to refer to trans people, make up new slurs such as troon, etc. Incidentally, a certain host of Navarro Media used the term TRA in a now-edited tweet, and I really hope that's not going where it looks like it's going. Stay away from Twitter, Michael. Don't listen to Anna Kasparian. She's gone off the deep end. Call your trans friends. I know this isn't your heart, Michael. Give me a doll. The point is, that aside, that you can only afford to be a single-issue voter like this if you're very, very comfortable. Most of us worry about how we're going to afford food, pay our rent, our skyrocketing bills. Rowling is a billionaire. She doesn't just have her own home, she has a castle, and a merchandising empire through the Harry Potter IP. Nothing makes you out of touch like not having any material concerns in a country that is ravaged by material inequality. And since she's got it made, she can't see how other people live. How most people live. Most trans people live paycheck to paycheck, if that. We can barely get out of bed, never mind mastermind a global conspiracy to destroy and dethrone the concept of womanhood. So, she was once a pretty standard Tony Blair-style neoliberal. Essentially someone who is right-wing but doesn't want to be perceived that way, so they try to be nice about minorities and occasionally throw a tiny little bone to the working class now and again to try and keep up the narrative that they actually care. And at some point in the last decade, she began to hyperfixate on trans people, to the point where any concerns she previously claimed to have vanished, and the only thing she cared about was hurting trans people. This is not as contradictory as you might initially think. She is comfortable. Her liberalism was not about helping people, it was about aesthetics, about looking sensible and like a decent, caring member of society. She was a vocal opponent of Jeremy Corbyn, and like many people of her generation, he exposed that they didn't actually want to change people's lives like they kept saying. He represented real change, and they hated that. They like the status quo. They want to keep it, but to be seen as one of the good guys from within it. But in an evil system, those who fight for the status quo are, by definition, fighting for evil to remain. And the same as she saw Jeremy Corbyn, she saw trans people as a threat to the status quo. Probably wrongly, because let's be honest, as much as I and the figureheads of trans history like Sylvia Rivera would advocate for dismantling capitalism and all systems of oppression, if we do get accepted eventually, it'll probably look a lot like the way gay people are seen in society now. We will be accepted if we assimilate, but those of us who don't assimilate are shunned or worse. And we'll always know that if we step out of line, we'll be one of the first on the chopping block. Still, she feels that society is under threat. As a woman in a man's world, her position, however powerful, will always feel a little tenuous. And like the petty bourgeoisie with a class base for the fascisms of the 20th century, that fear of their secure place in the world potentially being ripped away by those less fortunate, this leads them to take their insecurity out on those who would change the system. Because for them, for us, the system is suffocating. In a way, we are a threat, not because we have a sinister plan, but like many targets of IA before us, because the status quo has a gun pointed at our head. And as our societies suffer crisis after crisis, the status quo squeezes its trigger finger. I have a great relationship with Tom Riddle. He's a tough guy, real tough guy, but we get along great. He really doesn't like the people at Hogwarts, that Tom Riddle. Doesn't like them at all. Especially if they're Muggle-born, they told me. They told me I shouldn't say that word, but Tom Riddle, he calls them much worse, much worse. Very tough guy. Let's talk about someone who's gone through the same journey Rowling's been on. Someone who was once, before she became a social media figure, more sensible than she is today. Who went from making social media posts about how she doesn't understand transphobes to teaming up with literal Nazis to hold transphobic rallies. Proudly shouts that she's not a feminist when called one by those who wish to claim her on Rowling's side, and who endorsed Donald Trump way back in 2020. Someone whose merchandise Rowling proudly wears and links to, and who she considers a friend, even saying that she will pay all of her legal fees. I'm talking, of course, about Posie Parker, aka Kelly J. Keane Minshall. In the lead up to the 2020 election, after 4 years of Donald Trump's disastrous presidency, Posie Parker said, "On the issues I care about, Trump is my man."
If I'm gonna lay my cards on the table, I would like to wake up tomorrow without any change to the presidency. And I know I'm not supposed to say that, because that instantly makes me a white nationalist and a racist and a terrible person. But that's what I hope for. I think if it comes down to reproductive rights for women, or the right to say who we are and what we are, I think the latter is far more important.
4 years later, in the lead up to the 2024 election, she went much further, posting on the website formerly known as Twitter, "Trump is the only hope for the world. I hope Americans can see this." This is a personal friend of Rowling, someone who she's been open about bankrolling and promoted merch from, someone she speaks of proudly despite her working with Nazis, claiming she would work with any fascist if they supported her aims, and proudly not being a feminist. For details on Kelly Jane Keene's long history of outright wishing trans people dead and working with Nazis over and over again, Sean has a very long and in-depth video on this. I'll link in the description. But it's notable that Rowling defended her Nazi ties, and offered to pay her legal fees. This is someone Rowling associates with proudly, and she was once a fringe figure in the transphobe world, seen as too right-wing, not focused enough on feminism. And that's not entirely surprising. She is against contraception and abortion services for under 18s, works with and accepts money from the Heritage Foundation, says that women who stand in her way will be annihilated, and openly compares trans people to sex offenders and serial killers. If you want to know how far Rowling has gone, she wears this woman's shirts, promotes her stores, and offers to use her vast wealth towards the cause of fighting for this woman's Nazi collaborationist world tours in court. A few years ago, even arch transphobes like Julie Bindel refused to work with Keane, given her anti-feminist and anti-abortion stance. Now, she's not just in the inner circle, she is the inner circle, and Rowling is right there by her side. This isn't about feminism or women's rights. It's a single issue. And on this, Rowling and Kelly J. Keane are aligned. To both of them, above all else, their one political issue is removing trans people from public life.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
The main difference between them is that Rowling had a reputation in the public eye before making her transphobic turn, whereas Keane was barely a blip on the radar of anyone outside of her real-life circles until she became an anti-trans crusader. She became a name because of her infamy. Rowling gets a lot more grace from people because they associate her with fond memories, with the stories they grew up reading. It's a lot harder for people to accept that people they feel they know, however parasocial that knowledge might be, are not the person they thought they were. But the entire gender-critical movement has gathered in the direction of Kelly J. Keane. Where once feminism with transphobic characteristics was the dominant strain of transphobic thought, the liberal disguise of this particular bigotry has withered. And the movement, proudly for some of its proponents, reluctantly for many others, has regrouped around its far right. And it took many of the liberal transphobes with it, because they are, at the end of the day, single-issue voters. They will abandon all other policies and all other principles, if it means addressing their obsession. It's not just Rowling either that took this journey. Most of the public-facing transphobes have. And with that reorientation, their liberal mask has slipped. Hadley Freeman, one of the most irresponsible columnists, especially on trans issues, released an article after the US election that was extremely sympathetic to Donald Trump, and blamed the Democrats' loss on trans people. Because of course she does. That's all she thinks about, apart from defending Woody Allen. Now, she would disagree with this article being sympathetic to Trump, but just listen to this. After Trump's 2016 win, I signed up for monthly donations to Planned Parenthood to support abortion access, and the American Civil Liberties Union to support free speech. 3 years later, I cancelled both, when these organisations, like many others, reacted to the Trump era by prioritising gender ideology over women's rights. Gender ideology did not decide the election, but when Trump's campaign aired an advert showing Harris in 2019 reassuring the ACLU she would, if elected president, fund sex change surgery for transgender prisoners, accompanied by the unforgettable tagline, "Kamala is for they them, President Trump is for you," it shifted the race 2.7 points in Trump's favour. According to the most recent polls, the most common reason swing voters gave for rejecting Harris was she was too focused on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle classes. It turns out, if you mindlessly parrot niche academic theories, the mainstream public will think you're bananas. This is from Hadley Freeman's recent piece in The Guardian. Hadley Freeman is one of the worst columnists, period. I made a whole video about her last year that nobody watched, and I don't blame them because I wouldn't want to be exposed to that much Hadley Freeman either. In this section, she paints a picture of a Harris campaign that was too focused on pushing gender ideology, which is not a Harris campaign that existed, though it is one that Republicans campaigned as if it existed. And after Kamala decided to spend the campaign saying absolutely nothing except that she wanted to hug and kiss Republicans, it's not surprising that the Republican narrative was more popular, given that the Democratic narrative was non-existent.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
The actual Harris campaign never mentioned trans people, despite the Republicans consistently hammering it as an attack line, and Freeman's argument ignores that the shift in Trump's favour in the polls followed her running to the right after the DNC, campaigning with Liz Cheney, saying she's going to have a Republican in her cabinet, and saying she'd do nothing different from Biden. Something I'd argue had much more of an effect on people's decisions to vote than some attack had. Although the fact that she vehemently refused to address people's material conditions made that had a lot more effective than it would have been if she could run a better campaign.
I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world.
What the fuck?
She completely accepts Trump's narrative, claims she stopped supporting organizations doing the work for women's rights and access to healthcare purely because they weren't transphobic. This is her issue. She still claims that she is a Democrat, but if Trump were more polite, less vulgar, she would probably be very happy with him. She seems to agree with him on a lot more than she agreed with Kamala on, just from what she's written. She even denies in this article that Trump is a fascist, and says the left calling him one was a fatal mistake, something that Anna Kasparian has also said. Despite Trump making a bunch of Hitlerisms on the campaign trail and calling for an American Kristallnacht. But he agrees with her on the most important issue. And if he's a fascist, that means her stance on trans issues is aligned with fascists. And she can't accept that, because for her, liberalism is the aesthetics of being measured, sensible, knowledgeable, and sophisticated.
Me, a moderate and a liberal.
Despite this, Freeman and many other self-proclaimed liberals hold almost exactly the same views as a fascist like Donald Trump. And not just on trans people. There are liberals and there are liberals. Some people have genuine moral convictions, and some just hold on to the aesthetics of liberalism. The latter are much easier to turn into fascists, or at least hold fascist positions, even if they reject the ideology as a whole. Rowling and Freeman are that latter type of liberal, or at least they were. They held themselves up as progressive, forward-thinking, and that was exposed as untrue when the time came to have an opportunity to vote for real change, and they were repulsed at the idea of anything with a whiff of meaningful change that would uplift the poor and the vulnerable like they said they wanted all along. Their liberalism, as with many of this type, was exposed as being purely vibes. The idea of actual change in the direction they for many years professed they wanted, and probably thought they wanted, turned them into reactionaries. Not overnight, But as the world's idea of what a progressive was grew further and further away than what they were comfortable with, and their true politics came to the fore. This far, no further. The thing is, however, that anyone, given the right conditions, could become a reactionary. Whether through ignorance, personal grievance, or misguided scapegoating. There are many ways someone can fall down the pipeline from liberal to transphobe, and from transphobe to outright fascist. But if you have trans community, if you know trans people personally and connect with them, you're much less likely to fall into an ideology that paints them as some sort of grand villain, intent on destroying women. But even then, it's not impossible. With the right voices in your ear, with the right amount of shame, what we can say for sure, however, is that once you go deep enough into the transphobic rabbit hole, it is all you post about, all that matters to you. As we've seen time and time again, from Kelly J. Keane to J.K. Rowling to Graham Linehan, it becomes an obsession. And that obsession is the foremost driver of your every political action. And so you get avowed liberal and personal friend of Gordon Brown, J.K. Rowling, going to bat for Donald Trump upon his return to the White House, and whatever horrors await. In her own words, "Women like me, and there are a lot of us, aren't and have never been far-right. We simply want the left to wake the hell up, because we're watching it do its utmost to alienate people it used to represent. I'm not saying Trump's win was down to the gender stuff. I'm not an American voter, so I can't judge. In any case, the Labour Party won the last UK election, and they've embraced gender identity ideology wholeheartedly. What I do know is that millions of women in the UK and across the developed world are extremely angry about men and women's sport, men in women's jails, and the erosion of single-sex spaces. Parents are angry at being demonised because they don't want their troubled kids to undergo irreversible medical treatments of extremely questionable benefit. People are sick to the back teeth of being bullied and threatened for refusing to embrace an elitist, academia-generated ideology that's having severe real-world consequences. Large swathes of the left continue to be threatening and abusive to anybody who resists their attempts to impose ideological language or bully them out of wrongthink. Leftist activists jeer and sneer at erstwhile female allies for the crime of believing biological sex is real and matters. And leftist leaders still appear more interested in sucking up to gender activists than female nurses whose crime is not wanting to undress in front of a fully intact male. So to those screaming bigot and fascist at me, you should know two things. First, I'm completely indifferent to your disapproval, as I thought you'd have realised by now. Secondly, and far more importantly, the only thing more harmful to your cause than your pseudo-religious belief in gender identities is your astounding, self-righteous arrogance. I don't think you can really protest at being called a bigot when you're calling trans women fully intact males and claiming belief in gender identities is pseudo-religious when it's been established scientific fact for going on a century now. But do you see how completely different this is to the Rowling that was tweeting during Trump's first term? It's all about trans people. This post-election analysis is just a long rant about trans people, including calling us men and calling our existence a pseudo-religious belief. And that's not even getting into the irony of a literal billionaire calling trans people existing elitist. What's elitist is the fact that this is your key issue. The rest of us have actual problems to deal with. We have material needs that aren't being met. If anything is an elitist belief, it's that the main problem in society is trans people existing, because it just goes to show you don't understand the material conditions of anyone that doesn't live in a literal castle. She recognises that her views are seen as far-right, as fascist, and by enough people that it clearly bothers her, despite her saying that it doesn't. But she still sees herself as a liberal. She recognises her policies in Trump's campaign and sees this as the left's mistake for not catering to her and people like her, rather than the truth. That her ideology, her goals, are aligned with the far right. The left didn't leave her. She fell into a pipeline into fascist beliefs, and is shocked that she's found herself agreeing with a fascist, because to her, liberalism was a vibe, and she still heavily identifies with that vibe. She wants to be seen as sensible, as above it all, clear-eyed and measured, but that's always just been a vibe. What could the left have done to win her over? She suggests supporting people campaigning against trans people, or as she would put it, fully intact males with pseudo-religious beliefs in gender identity. But from the outside, we can see that this is clearly not true. The Labour Party capitulated to Rowling's every single demand, begging for her endorsement, and she still came out against them. They've been aggressively anti-trans since they got in, continuing all of the Tories' awful and transphobic policies, keeping their anti-trans appointees in places like the EHRC, and extending the ban on puberty blockers and making it permanent. And yet, in this very rant, Rowling still sees them as having embraced gender identity ideology wholeheartedly. Rowling's beliefs on trans people are so extreme that she thinks that Keir Starmer is embracing gender identity ideology wholeheartedly. I can't even imagine what it's like to see the world that way. It's so out of touch, she might as well be living in a different galaxy. If you are as rabidly anti-trans as Rowling or Kelly J. Keane or any of these people, there is no appeasing you. No one will be transphobic enough for your liking, because you're driven by a single-minded hatred. And frankly, even fascists like Donald Trump care about other things too. This is a ticket to swing further and further right, looking for someone who will do what you actually want, to remove trans people from public life. You might not think that's far right because you don't think trans people are real. You think that we're men in disguise for nefarious and sinister purposes. Ooh. But we are real. We're not Nosferatu, we're real. And to rid us from public life, well, you would have to implement something very much like fascism. And most people, no matter how sympathetic they might be to things like trans people in sports or whatever weird issue you're focusing on, won't be down with what it would actually take to achieve your political aims. Honestly, the most frustrating part about reading the transphobe reactions to Trump's victory is that despite agreeing with him on trans people, blaming everyone to the left of him, a literal fascist, for not being transphobic enough, they still don't see that they and he are marching to the beat of the same drum. Their image of themselves is so separate to what the reality of their political aims are that they simultaneously advocate for fascist policies and hold on to their identities as sensible liberals, even as they froth at the mouth that trans people still haven't been punished enough for the crime of merely existing. In a way, people like Posie Parker are refreshing because she's honest about who she is. She knows she's not a feminist and she'll tell you that. She's proud to work with Nazis in America, the UK and Australia, and will tell you that she'll work with anyone who furthers the one cause that she cares about. And yet, she has the same beliefs as Rowling. She's just more honest with what that says about her. Rowling maintains a cognitive dissonance, that she's fighting for women, that she's feminist, that she's a liberal who the left has betrayed. But they have the same ideals. They're friends. More than that, they're comrades. Rowling is Posie Parker's patron, her bankroller, and promotes her actively. Aligning with people like Trump is the end goal of transphobes of this ilk. Not your run-of-the-mill ignorant boomer, but the kind who can't stop posting about trans people, who are stuck in gender-critical Facebook groups, whose whole life is based around posting about how sick trans people are in the head. And Rowling is one of them, as is Posie Parker, Graham Linehan, and many others. And there are people right now coming down the pipe that you can see, like Anna Kasparian. They might not fall down all the way, but you can see how far they've come. That is the natural endpoint of a strain of transphobia that isn't happy to just limit trans people's ability to live in society, but actively wants us all disappeared from the public sphere. That is, by its very nature, fascist. And the only reason these people still maintain any distance from the MAGA movement, and won't embrace it wholeheartedly and more honestly, is their ego. The idea of themselves as above this and better than it. The difference is only based on vibes. In terms of what they want, well, Posie Parker said it outright. They will work with whoever they can to further their one goal, their singular focus. And to achieve it, they'll need someone who's willing to use the might of the state to eradicate a minority group. And what can you call that but fascist? Thanks for watching.
What else should I be? Please don't take off my mask.
Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share it with all your friends, and give me money to get out of my big overdraft. I would like to get out a bit. Send me £2,000. You probably can't afford that, but send me a little bit if you can, if you have some money. And if you do, you can give me on Coffee or PayPal, links below as always, or sign up to my Patreon or my YouTube memberships, where you get early videos, access to the members on your Discord, my Nintendo friend code, and exclusive content, and your name read out at the end of each video, just like these lovely people. Carolyn, Imogen Q, Luciano Frias Andrade, Adam, Cerise Influencer 99, Harry, End of 191, Cav, Quesadilla de Tortilla Azul, Liron, Adam Lees, Danielle Nevels, No Not That Paul, MB, Madeline Aguirre, Ben Murphy, Lex Phoenix, Enter Kozitz, Mira D, Jade Senior, Bo Ear, James W, Marvin Orr, Thorngill, Bob the Builder 5445554, Deborah Laboon, Vegas, Zilla Zathenium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia the Set, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Arestria, Ali Catgill, John N, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shielded Aiden, Robin Podolsky, Turtle Choom, Casual Observer, Manta Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philip Tiprocker, Soma Philip, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, Howard Lott, Neronier, Scotch, and Chick.
Me, a moderate and a liberal, most uncomfortable.